Oh, I know that sound. It's time for the Beer and News Report. Hi, and welcome to the Beer News Report. Cheers. I got a special show for you today. You remember my show on life extensions? It was based on the work done by Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Well, he saw that show and he was willing to do an interview. So today is going to be that interview. And he's really cool to talk to. And I hope you enjoy the show. But I got to warn you, the internet wasn't 100% that day. And there's a lot of glitches where the picture freezes and the words get really robotic. So I tried to caption what was being said so that you can understand. And, well, I just hope you enjoy the show. So without any further ado, here's the interview of Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Beer News Report. I want to introduce Dr. Aubrey de Grey. He's an English author and biomedical gerontologist. He's Chief Science Officer at the SENS Research Foundation, also VP of New Technology Discovery at Ajax Therapeutics. He's Editor-in-Chief of Rejuvenation Research, author of the book Mitochondrial Free Radical Theory of Aging in 1999, and co-authored the book Ending Aging in 2007. He's an international adjunct professor at Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. He's a fellow at the Gerontological Society of America, also at the American Aging Association, and also at the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He's been on 60 Minutes, done TED Talks, and I even watched your Joe Rogan Experience. I thought that was great. He was born in London, England. He went to school at the University of Cambridge, got a BA in computer science in 1985. Then he joined Sinclair Research as a software engineer doing artificial intelligence. In 1986, he co-founded Man-Made Minions. Then he met Adelaide Carpenter. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Pretty good.
She was a biologist, and she's the one that got him into biology. And in 2000, he got a PhD in biology from Cambridge, based on your first book. Well, Dr. de Grey, welcome to the Beer News Report. I don't have a beer for you, but cheers.
Cheers indeed. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
You've seen them. I've done 2 shows on life extensions, and I know that you may think that I'm under the pro-aging trance, but I'm not. I want to show both sides of the story, but I'm with you. I'm in your boat.
Yeah, actually, no, to be honest, my impression from your previous shows was reasonably positive. There are plenty of people who are far more cynical and irrational about this than you, so don't worry.
Okay, good. I want to start on the right foot. And I know that we're going to push aside new discoveries for now. We want to talk about the political and the rhetorical aspects of this technology. So one thing I wanted to, I know that you had talked, this was a while ago, well, actually it was in February, but is the government starting to put in more money? I know that SENS, your group, your foundation does not accept government grants, but have you noticed that government is now putting more money into it or no?
So first things first, we absolutely do accept government grants. It's just that until very recently, it has been like, you know, a snowball's chance in hell of actually getting one for the work that we do, because we are much more focused on really doing something about aging than the mainstream of the biology community has been until quite recently. So, when you apply for a government grant, you're competing against a lot of other people who are doing things that the government thinks might actually be possible. And if the thing that you're proposing to do, they think it's impossible, then you're not going to get the money, are you? So no, we totally accept grants. And actually, we got one just yesterday. So,
right.
Yeah,
it was cool. I thought when I was listening to some of your other interviews, you said because your company does high risk, high reward, and not the stuff that the government wants to see, you know, hey, I want to see small steps of progress, that you didn't get government grants.
Well, it's becoming wrong, is what I'm saying. So what you remember is basically true. So certainly for the past 10 years that the foundation has existed, we have indeed relied entirely on philanthropy, on the donations that we receive from private individuals who do have sympathy with the high risk, high reward approach. But the thing that is progressively, gradually changing is that the work that we do is ceasing to be seen as science fiction. It is ceasing to be seen as it's getting more within the range of things that people who don't want to take risks will take seriously.
All right. Well, that's good news. So does that mean that they're adding actually more money into it?
A little bit, but at the moment, this is really on the government side, on the public funding side, this is really in the early days. You know, hardly anything has happened yet. The big thing that has happened in a much bigger way over the past maybe 5 years, certainly especially over the past 2 or 3 years, is that the private sector has started to get involved. So this is kind of halfway between the philanthropic sector and the government, because on the one hand, the private sector are generally quite comfortable with early stage investment, high risk, high reward work. But on the other hand, it must be high reward. In other words, the risk has to be sufficiently moderate that they can probabilistically expect that they might actually make some money in the long run. So we reached that, kind of started to reach that threshold where the more courageous investors would start coming in only a few years ago. And that has exploded over the past few years. It's not just even our own work at Sense Research Foundation, but literally way over 100 other companies that have come into existence, independently of us, but doing very similar work, very closely aligned work. And really what it amounts to now is that our business model, even though we are a non-profit, is that we take projects along until they reach a sufficient level of proof of concept that some of the more courageous investors are willing to take a punt. And at that point, we spin the projects out as startup companies. So we've done that half a dozen times now.
Oh, nice. Now, when you say private industries are getting involved, I researched Google's opening up one called Calico. Is that like one of the bigger ones that have started?
Yeah. So yeah, Calico is certainly one of the bigger ones, probably, well, definitely the biggest, in fact, but it's very much not the most important one. Calico was created actually quite some time ago now, in 2014, when really nobody else had come along to do this. And even that was slow because Larry and Sergey had been familiar with my work and actually had met me a decade earlier than that. But they've never given us a penny, and they have chosen to take Calico in completely the wrong direction. So as far as I'm concerned, it will be pure luck if Calico ever do anything that actually matters much. Whereas if it is, it's very sad indeed, and I have been saying so publicly and indeed to the faces of Larry and Sergey for some time now.
Okay. Hey, I kind of want to jump over to the Joe Rogan experience because in it, he had mentioned that his mom was having knee problems and he took her down to Panama to get stem cell research from Dr. Neil Reardon.
Yep.
Yeah. And the reason I'm asking is how come we don't have that type of technology here in the United States? Why does he have to go to Panama?
Well, it's coming. So certainly stem cell therapies are a very important component of what we will eventually see as the panel of anti-aging interventions that truly keeps us young and youthful however long we live. But they are still pretty experimental. So, as ever, the regulatory authorities are very cautious about approving them for use. Now, that's not really the fault of the regulatory authorities, the FDA in our case, the Food and Drug Administration. That's really simply a reflection of public attitudes. The public really don't like adverse events in medicine. Now, when one person dies in a clinical trial, all hell breaks loose. This actually happened 20 years ago in the field of gene therapy, and it basically closed down the field for a long time. Whereas if lots and lots and lots of people die from being unable to get hold of therapies that are safe because the therapies haven't been approved yet, that doesn't make the headline. So really, it's just the risk-averse nature of the human condition, I'm afraid.
Wow. Okay. And on a side subject, I had brought up stem cells, and are you seeing anything from the Right to Lifers where the pluripotent stem cell from the baby embryos, are they pushing back on you at all, or that's kind of?
Not at all. That's completely over. And the reason it's over is because the way in which these cells are now produced does not involve destroying embryos. So
Okay.
way back 20 years ago, when the Bush administration banned federal funding of embryonic stem cell research, that was because the only way you could make embryonic stem cells was from embryos. But then in 2006, a Japanese group came along and figured out how to take regular cells from, not even stem cells of any kind, just regular cells from anybody, and basically turn their developmental clock backwards so that they became pretty much identical to embryonic stem cells without ever having been in an embryo. And so the whole thing was completely solved by technology.
Excellent. Well, that's great news. So then, in terms of the stem cell research, we should be going as strong as ever in that, because it seems like all the hurdles are gone.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, the real problem at the moment is that it's still really expensive, and so the clinical trials take a long time, and the impact on most people, the impact on aging, is not expected to be very significant. See, one thing you have to understand about aging, and this is the way that I've always spoken about it, is that it's the accumulation, the simultaneous accumulation of a whole bunch of different types of molecular and cellular damage in the body. And any one of those types of damage can kill you, more or less on schedule, on its own, however well we fix all the others. So that means that if we get really good stem cell therapy, but we still haven't got the rest of the stuff working, then it's not going to actually confer much benefit. So the political pressure, the commercial pressure to actually bring this forward faster is not nearly as strong as would be needed and would be desired.
I know that you always make references to cars and airplanes, and so what you're saying is basically you can replace the tires, but if the engine dies, the car's dead.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you had mentioned that these changes are close, and then when it does change, there's going to be a shift. There's going to be a governmental shift. I'm thinking a health paradigm shift where it's going to affect the economy, it's going to affect healthcare, and it's going to affect the government. And I had brought up in my show Medicare, Medi-Cal, and Social Security. And when you were talking with Joe Rogan, you brought up universal basic income. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, so this is actually a lot more complicated and a lot more urgent than most people think. So what I want to emphasize at the outset is that the thing that policymakers and decision makers, also in the private sector, across the whole financial services sector, for example, the thing that those people need to be focusing on is not the changes that will result from the arrival of these therapies. When these therapies arrive, suddenly, a lot of people are going to be a lot healthier, a lot older. That's going to, gradually over time change the demographics of the world, so that there are more and more people who are chronologically old, and of course fewer and fewer people who are biologically old, and that's all great. But that should not be the focus of today's attention, because it's only going to happen 20 or 30 years from now. Okay, and even then it's only going to happen gradually, maybe. The thing that is much more urgent is when people start to anticipate those changes. Supposing 5 years into the future, just 5 years, not 20 years, 5 years into the future from now, you decide that actually, even though these therapies don't yet exist, they're coming. You don't know exactly how soon they're coming, but you think that there's a fairly good chance, let's say at least a 50-50 chance, that they're going to come along in time for you. And remember, these therapies are rejuvenation therapies. So even if you're already 70 at that time, right, you won't stay 70 biologically. You'll be wound back to being biologically 20 or 30, right? So you'll be in the prime of life again, mentally and physically. Now, if you know that there is a fair chance that that's going to happen, what are you going to do? How are you going to plan ahead? If you think about it, a huge amount of the big ticket items that underpin the global economy are predicated on people's expectation of how long they're going to live and how long they're going to stay healthy. Things like what kind of pension plan you want, what kind of premium you want to pay for your life insurance, health insurance, inheritance arrangements, all that kind of stuff, right? And that expectation of how long you're going to live as a result of therapies that have not yet arrived but are within sight, that expectation is going to change very soon and very suddenly. Here's why I think that. I think that's going to change simply because in the laboratories of the top scientists around the world at the moment, progress is being made at a very substantial rate. And there will be sufficient progress in the next few years, only in mice, not in humans, but still, right? Sufficient progress that my friends and colleagues in the community, the other experts in the community, will feel able to go out and say that this is coming. Basically, they're going to be able to say what I've been saying for 15 years. Now, you may ask, why haven't they been saying it for 15 years, same as me? The answer is very simple. I am unique in this field in that I am the only expert who does not rely for the bulk of his funding of his research on the government, which was your first topic, right? Yeah. If you do rely on government funding for your research, then you are competing with a very large number of other people. And I mentioned earlier that that means that you've got no chance of getting money if you're doing really high risk, high reward work, but it's worse than that. It's worse than that. The people who make the decisions are desperately looking for reasons to say no, so they can whittle down the applications, right? And one very straightforward reason to say no that is completely safe. So everybody except me has to be extraordinarily curmudgeonly in what they say publicly. They have to make absolutely certain that they cannot be accused, however unfairly, of being irresponsible. And that is now changing. So if you think back, I wrote my book that you mentioned earlier, Ending Aging, in 2007. That's 13 years ago. It took until last year before any of my other colleagues who have this handicap that I don't have, that I just mentioned, were able to do the same thing. David Sinclair came out with a book last year, which was called Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. More or less the same thing, right? Nir Barzilai came out with a similar book. Yeah. So this is now happening. And a year or two, three from now, you'll be seeing this being the consensus, the center of gravity of publicly stated expert opinion. It won't just be one guy with a crazy British accent and a long beard. So that means that people will notice, just opinion formers. Oprah Winfrey will start to say it and believe it. And when that happens, game over. You know, it will be impossible to get elected, even in this crazy country, unless you have a manifesto commitment to have a war on aging. And even if you ignore the electoral imperative, the sheer mercenary economic imperative will totally drive it.
So, and I remember you bringing that up, and you had mentioned that since we're all getting healthier, health costs will actually come down.
Right.
And are you seeing pushback, or maybe the lobbyists from Big Pharma saying, hey, wait a minute, you're cutting into our industry?
Not at all. Not at all. A lot of people make that mistake. They think that that's going to happen. And certainly I'm quite sure that there are some people in Big Pharma, some not terribly intelligent, or perhaps just people who are not quite paying attention, who do think that way. But the fact that the medical industry today makes its money out of sick people does not translate into what you think it translates into. If you think, there are already some exceptions to that rule, some preventative medicines that are really profitable. So the most obvious categories are statins, you know, which basically lower cholesterol, and they're preventative, right? People take them when they're not yet sick. Similarly, ACE inhibitors for high blood pressure, same deal, right? Now, how they got that way is a complicated story. Really, they only got that way sideways, having initially been treatments for people who were sick. But the fact is they're there and they're profitable. So Big Pharma know perfectly well that prevention is just as easy to make money out of as treatment. It's just that the public needs to want it. The fundamental problem at this point is that currently the public are not persuaded that preventative medicine is a good idea. They know that fundamentally medicine is black magic, and that, you know, if you're not yet sick, then maybe you'll do yourself more harm than good with some experimental new thing, right? So they don't like it. And it takes a really definitive demonstration of safety before that changes. But that will come. And when it does, the medical industry are going to be totally happy to follow the money.
Now, have you noticed in the public if okay, I'll back up a little. A lot of times you see that, hey, if you want to reduce your health or get rid of aging problems, you take these vitamins or you go into a high pressure, high oxygen tank. And there's a number of different things. You take human growth hormone. And the one I do think that works somewhat is caloric restriction, although it's so hard to do. I can't even diet it. I can't imagine caloric restriction. So did that first cause a hurdle that, hey, we're different from these guys? We're actually going after diseases?
You kind of, don't call it diseases. This is one of the big, like conceptual errors that the world has been so insistent on perpetuating. These things that are called age-related diseases should not be called diseases. Alzheimer's is not a disease, it's part of aging. And it's very important to know that, because if you call it a disease, then that makes you think that you should be able to find a drug for it, in the same way that we have drugs for malaria or, for infections. That is a really dangerously inaccurate way of thinking. But anyway, so so absolutely, calorie restriction is hard to do. And that's a large part of why there's such a huge effort to develop drugs that trick the body into thinking it's doing calorie restriction when it isn't. These are called calorie restriction mimetics. So a lot of the things you hear about these days, like rapamycin and metformin and resveratrol, these are basically designed to trick the body in this way and to elicit the same gene expression patterns that are elicited when you genuinely are in a famine. Problem is that calorie restriction itself works much less well in long-lived species than it does in short-lived species. If you take species like mice or rats, where it was first discovered, where calorie restriction was first investigated, then sure, you can take them and you can feed them 30 or 40% less than what they would like, and they'll live 30 or 40% longer than otherwise. Fantastic. That would be a lot of years if it could be translated to humans. And if you go further down the evolutionary ladder and you look at nematode worms, which are able to live only 3 weeks or so normally, you can actually multiply that by a factor of about 5 just by doing starvation in the right way at the right time in the life cycle. But in monkeys, you'll be lucky if you get a couple of percent. Even that's controversial. In dogs, which are kind of intermediate, people got maybe 10%. In humans, chances are it'll be even less, right? So, it's not nothing. I'm not saying it's nothing. And certainly, even if it doesn't make you live longer, there is reasonable evidence that most people may be able to stay healthier for longer. So again, that's great. But I always have to emphasize that it's not the fountain of youth. If we want to do this job properly and keep people truly healthy, both mentally and physically, for a lot longer than we can at the moment, then we totally need something more.
Now, we're coming to the close of the show, because my show goes for about half an hour. In terms of extending aging, I know that from other people when I talk to their or I've seen their shows on TED Talks, they seem to say that 120 is like the wall, the age wall, that it's very hard to go past 120. Now, I'm assuming you're wanting to extend this age wall, but is it reasonable to think 150 or 200? Is that something?
No, it's completely unreasonable to think of any kind of limit. And any kind of discussion that there is some kind of natural limit is inherently circular, because it arises from analysis of people who have already lived, who by definition have not had access to medicines that have not yet been developed. It's clearly completely irrelevant to what might happen in the future. Now, the question of whether there is some kind of bigger limit can be answered just by looking at what aging is. Aging is simply the accumulation of damage in the body at the molecular and cellular level. And that damage can, in principle, be repaired. That's exactly what all of the therapeutic work that's going on right now, including stem cell therapy, is all about. Restoring the structure and composition of the body to how it was at a younger age. And if you do that to a simple man-made machine, we already know that it works. If you look at a vintage 100-year-old car it got that way not because it was designed to last that long. It was only designed to last maybe 10 years. But just by comprehensive, periodic, preventative maintenance, it is lasting indefinitely. And if you ask people who own 100-year-old cars today whether they would last another 100 years, they'll say, of course, why not? Right? So it's exactly like that.
Okay, I get it. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to say to the?
Oh, of course. The thing you haven't asked me is, where do I write the check? Right. So, of course, we have a website, sense.org, S for sugar, E for elephant, N for November, S for sugar.org. And there's massive information there written for every kind of audience, from complete novices through to absolute experts in aging. And there's lots of information, news information about what's happening in the field, what we're doing, what other people are doing. There's a calendar to say where I'm going to be speaking. And of course, there's a nice big friendly donate button. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, it was very enjoyable having you on. And I'd love to meet you in person at a show or something. That'd be fantastic.
Totally, sometime.
Yeah, so hopefully 2021, when we get the vaccine, hopefully.
Indeed. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers indeed.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my interview of Dr. Aubrey de Grey. I know I sure did. As you can see, my beer's almost empty, so that means we're at the end of the show. If you liked it, please hit that like button. If you want to subscribe, that'd be great, because then when I do a new show, you'll get notified by YouTube. If you want to send me a show idea or a comment right there, that email address, that would get you to me. And as always, keep your beer cold and your interests hot. Cheers.